Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. This is a weekly recap for week 39 of 2025. I am your host, Hector Colonis, and I am joined by an amazing co-host today, Ethan Laub from Office R&D. Ethan, how are you?
Good. How are you, Hector? Thanks for having me on.
Great. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for sponsoring this week's newsletter. So this week's podcast, we're going to dive into a few topics. There were so many great pieces in this week's newsletter. Definitely recommend, if you're not following along, hop onto thisweekincoworking.com and click on week 39 to see all the links we're talking about and to dig into the links that we just do not have enough time to dig into. Now, we're going to talk a little bit around some AI adjustments and shifts happening in co-working spaces. We're going to obviously talk about the tech reports that Office R&D put out. We're also going to talk about this juggle and balance between hosting and being hospitable. Look a little bit at kind of what a broken leg can teach us about running remote co-working spaces, and then dig into some data and some news out of WeWork in India. So before we do that, Ethan, thanks again for being here. Tell us about this report. What is this report that you put out?
Yeah, our pleasure. Thanks, Hector. So the TechStack survey report, it was a survey of 230 co-working operators. Initially, it was designed for internal use at Office R&D to help us make better product decisions and understand what technologies operators are using. But we found it so interesting that we thought we would get it out there in the world and let the broader industry read it, and I hope that they'll find it very interesting. It contains kind of three main things. One was to understand what the tech stack is of our operators. What are the vendors, top vendors that they're using? Number two, what are their key technology challenges? And then what are some interesting emerging trends, such as adoption of AI? And so that's what the contents of the survey are.
I mean, it is a really fascinating survey, and I was very shocked that you had shared it out because I'm like, well, this is your entire product roadmap if you follow this to the T. So why share it, right? Why make it available to both your customers, prospects, and your competitors?
Well, it's great content, and we thought that our customers would benefit from it by understanding what are the other technologies that their counterparts, their peers are using. Helps the broader industry have an interesting conversation around some of these interesting trends. It helps us inform our roadmap. And frankly, we thought that there's nothing to be lost with that transparency of sharing this information. There's nothing proprietary in that information that would harm Office R&D. On the contrary, we think it's a great thing for everyone to have access to.
Completely agree. And thank you again for sharing it. It is in the newsletter. Anywhere you get the newsletter, there's a button there to download it. No email gate or anything. Just go in, grab the copy, and make sure that you kind of read through it. Now, just give us we're going to dive into a little bit of what you shared in the summary. But before we do that, Ethan, many folks probably haven't seen your face or heard your voice before. Tell us a little bit more about what you do at Office R&D and how long you've been with the firm.
Absolutely. I've been at Office R&D for a little over 3 years, and I'm head of product operations. It's a bit of a amorphous role, but essentially what my job is to do is to make sure that the product team operates smoothly, the trains run on time. I'm responsible for making sure that our product team has the data and the tools they need to do their jobs. And I also serve as a bit of a glue between the product and engineering team and the rest of our organization.
Absolutely critical role. And thank you for taking some time out to join us today.
Of course.
So let's dive straight into your report that you put out. The challenges. What was the number one takeaway from the things that kept people up at night when it comes to their tech stack?
Well, this may not be a surprise to many of you who are listening, but the biggest technology challenge for flex operators is integrating all of their different solutions and software together seamlessly. 61% of respondents said that's their top challenge. So that definitely stood out in the report.
Yes, and I'm just glowing because anybody who knows me, who's listened to this, has done any work with me, knows that integrations is where I spend 95% of my week when I'm not in this lovely hat swap of putting the newsletter together. So I completely agree, and it's something that we definitely have to tackle as an industry, but also, there are businesses out there, some that have kangaroo logos, some that don't, that can help with this challenge. But you also dove into a really detailed view at the array of different platforms being used. You went through accounting, CRM, access, network, payments, e-commerce, onboarding, member experience in 3 subcategories. What was the number one number here? Like, how many platforms are people using on an average basis?
There's an incredible number, dozens and dozens, and it depends on the category. So if you're talking about payments, for example, or CRM or accounting, they're more concentrated. They're dominated by just a handful of vendors. And those are cases where Office R&D has built native integrations that are very deep. But then you have other categories like network management, for example, which are much more diffused, much more fragmented, where you have dozens and dozens of different network vendors that people are using. And so those are where the biggest challenges are, where you get into those categories where there are no dominant vendors. And so you need to, I think there's a huge benefit to having connectors like Syncaroo or automation tools like Zapier, where you can handle the long tail more efficiently.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, there are specific things that need to be native. Your payments, most times your door access on 95% of the cases want to be kind of native, want to be tied directly to that user base. But of course, you've got secondary, tertiary, which I don't even think came up in the surveys. Like, this is what we use, but our landlord has their own tech stack.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
that is like a lot of the conversations that we have over at Syncaroo. What were the main trends that you guys shared in the report?
Well, there were two main ones that we asked about. One was we were interested in understanding, and this relates again to the sort of co-working platform that operators are looking for. We learned that a majority of co-working operators are looking for an open ecosystem. So they prefer not to get everything from one vendor. They would prefer to pick and choose the software for each use case that is best in breed for them, that has the functionality they need at the price point that they want, and they want to seamlessly integrate that with their platform. That was one trend that came out to us. The other one was very interesting. It's around AI adoption. We were really curious to see how much actual AI adoption is happening in the industry so far. And what we found is that 26% of operators are already using AI in some fashion. And the two main use cases that they use it for are member engagement and operational automation. And another 60% of operators who answered the survey said they're seriously considering using AI in the future. So I think if we talk again a year from now, we're going to see a much more actual adoption level.
So let's take that and not make it a if, let's make it a when we speak again in 1 year.
Yep.
And let's dive straight into some of the news this week. I know you guys also put some recommendations at the end of the report. Definitely, if you are listening in, go and grab that, download it. They are fantastic recommendations and completely unbiased, if I don't mind saying. It's not, use Office R&D for all these use cases. This is the thing you should think about when you're implementing any of the technology we've discussed so far. There's actually a news story that we shared this week about a new exec sitting at CEO Suite, who is a multi-location, I think 20 plus location operator out in APAC and Southeast Asia. And he was interviewed and asked about what his main strategies were going to be moving forward with the company. The main piece of the whole crux of that interview was that he wants to automate more of the business using AI. And given what we've already discussed, and the fact that we're seeing this trend, Ethan, do you think that this is the right strategy coming in from outside of the industry to stop bringing in AI automation across the business?
Well, definitely automation. Automation can be implemented in many different ways, right? And AI is one of them. It's potentially super powerful, but from an operator's perspective, it also could be risky, right? It carries risks. I was thinking, I'm a product guy. That's my background. And I was thinking about how can we get AI out there in the industry in a way that will be useful and actually adopted. And I was thinking conceptually that the riskier the use case, right? When you start getting into things like billing or pricing, things like that, or selling very large deals, operators will naturally be more cautious about allowing AI to be totally autonomous, do its own thing. And they're going to want to have maybe humans in the loop, some sort of oversight. For use cases that are less risky, those may be the early adopter things where they're willing to turn it loose and let AI be fully autonomous. So that was an interesting thing that was going through my mind as I was reading this interview with Paul from CEO Suite around what may come first and what may come last when it comes to using AI for flex operators.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting given that it's something that I spend way too many hours a day looking into, not within our industry and with execs all day, every day. But just this morning, I was reading another newsletter from not in our industry because obviously, I am a bit of a geek around the stuff. And there was this big report, I think it was in Wall Street Journal, around how in big companies, when they're implementing mandatory use of AI tools, it's creating what they're calling work AI slop, which is basically, I don't reply to you using my own mind, I reply to you using AI, and then you have to kind of figure out which of this is true, which of this is hallucination. Do you defer to someone else? Do you return to person? And you're creating 3 layers more work by trying to save time by generating. And so we're very much having conversations across the board of, can you use AI internally to speed up the interactions between your own teams, but implement it incorrectly? You know, everyone is sending those massive dashes to each other instead of actually one-word emails or one-sentence emails that get the job done. We're seeing a lot of success on the client-facing side when you've got that human in the loop, when you've got that ability. But it's just such an interesting juggle, right? You want to automate, you want to draw down your costs, and we're going to dive into that, but you also don't want to lose that human experience. And I think you actually mentioned that there was another link in the newsletter this week that caught your eye in a similar vein. Which one was that?
I think it was, we need to be a host and hospitable. Was that the one?
That is it.
All
that
right.
is from Stormy over at Juicy.
That's right.
Fantastic piece.
I loved it.
Digging into that balance, right? There is a difference between hosting and kind of holding space, and then being hospitable and making someone feel really welcome. So obviously we're both tech guys and product guys. What caught your attention about this? Like, where does tech play in that balance?
Well, I came from the travel industry. That's where I started my career. And I saw a lot of parallels to hospitality, parallels to the hotel industry, and how the great hotel chains, they need to be very efficient in their processes, but they also need to be great with hospitality, especially if you're in the upper leagues, you know, like Ritz-Carlton, for example. And I think there's the parallels there where if you're a one location flex operator or a one location boutique hotel, the CEO, the general manager are there all the time. And so they can create that culture more easily of deep hospitality, of knowing everyone by first name, greeting them, et cetera. But the challenges that came to my mind, again, as a tech guy and a product guy, is how do you make that scalable when you become a 5, 10, 15 plus location operator? How do you make those processes and that culture scalable when the CEO is not in every location all the time? And that's not easy to do, but it's a major challenge. And it's something where I think technology plays a role, but also just processes and culture and training play a big role. And a bit of human empowerment also plays a role as well. And I thought of going back to Ritz-Carlton. One thing, it's a story in the industry, is Ritz-Carlton is famous for having this $2,000 per employee permission where in order to solve a customer problem, they're authorized to spend or to waive up to $2,000 to please that customer and to solve their problem. And I think doesn't mean that it's the same thing monetarily in the flex industry, but the principle is the same, where you want to empower people to a certain degree so they don't have to delay resolution of problems, feel empowered to treat someone as if they were the co-founder, you know?
Yeah, I really love that. And Stormy really nailed it by saying a co-working space that only hosts may run like clockwork, but feel pretty sterile. But a space that only leads on hospitality may feel warm, but chaotic, right? Without any structure. So the spaces that thrive are the ones that do both. And I think you're absolutely right. It is that implementation of processes. Going back to what CEO Suite's exec was saying, maybe that's a great use of AI, right? Bringing in so that every member of your team at the touch of their fingertips can know everything about every customer, right?
Yes.
That is where, you know, being able to streamline that, knowing that someone's kid just had a recital or they were in another co-working space in your network last week because they were having a soccer final, right? And being able to bring that back into the conversation and make them feel seen, make them feel heard in a way that isn't making your teams scrambling on WhatsApp, asking each other. Like, I think that is the balance, right? And that is the golden standard, the Ritz-Carlton of co-working, if you ask me.
Yep.
Which doesn't
absolutely.
have that 2000,
I love
right?
it. You know, make of films where, you know, the president's in the room and the president has an assistant who's saying, this is Senator so-and-so, you know, this is such and such CEO. It's like AI could serve that role for the community manager,
Absolutely.
reminding them about who is this, what problems have they had, care about. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be like, we're definitely off the deep end here with tech. This is become a tech episode and it's fine. If you don't like it, we'll be back next week with another episode. But I've been watching what's happening, Meta's Rays and, Google's latest glasses and a few of the other wearables. There is no reason why those systems can't talk to Office R&D and HubSpot and etc. and know who this person is based on their name, their company, whatever, and be that whisper in your ear, right? That's telling you, this is the thing that happened. Maybe go reward them. They were in the news last week. They just did a fundraise. They're hiring. This information to a community manager, especially a good community manager who's not stuck copying and pasting from one screen to another, is the future of hospitality and hosting in our industry. That's the vision I'm aiming towards.
I love it. A year from now, we're going to be talking to me, Hector.
There you go. And they're going to be telling me, Hector just published a newsletter. So I'm going to take a little bit sideways from there and move away from just like the future looking to a situation that we saw over in London with the space called Ramen Space, founded by Charlie, who is the founder of a online community called Ramen Club, which is for bootstrappers who are kind of working on monetizing their passions, their dreams, without taking on venture capital. And they ended up creating a co-working space. They've been in the newsletter a few times now, but in between launching and now, their founder broke his leg. And so he had already planned to be in the co-working space and being that glue that connects everything, the ops, the tech, the people, the community, everything together. He now was pretty much immobile, or far less mobile than he anticipated. And so I had to really dive into how do you create a remote ops playbook, and shared that this week. And I found it fascinating, both as a product guy, as someone who's run co-working spaces, and who's had to, step out of businesses at certain points for whatever reasons. What did you take away from this piece?
It was a really interesting piece. I thought made me think about the value of automation, the ability to tie technologies together to automate these manual processes so that you don't need to burden your staff or yourself. You can focus on the big stuff and on the human element there. So that to me was the main insight from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting. And the fact that it's opened a couple of months ago and they're sitting at 90% capacity occupied. They're sitting at 15K monthly revenue. He's implemented about 8 key strategies, from hiring an active community member to run their space, which is a really cool idea.
Yeah.
Using digital tools to empower their cleaning staff and their janitorial team, to order supplies, offering free event space, swapping media promotions, all these clever tactics when you can't physically be in your space. And I speak to a lot of operators who are going from their first location to 2 or 3, and they're trying to figure out, how do I implement a playbook where my spaces can be lightly staffed, right? And ideally, you could have one community manager or a team of community managers monitor and manage a network of spaces within a city. And if you get it right, it brings down your costs, increases your margins, improves the yields, gets you better partnerships. But what happens if you get it wrong? We also saw another link, or I shared another link in the newsletter this week, from the team or the CMO over at CoWorks, where she needed to get into a space for a day pass, tried to apply, use the forms on the website, didn't get back, had come in, came in, no one was there, they couldn't get access, couldn't get Wi-Fi. 36 minutes later, she left. She was like, I'm done. I need to go find somewhere else to work. And this is not a unique situation. We're seeing a lot of spaces are shifting. They've implemented Growth Hub. They've got their e-commerce lined up. They've got all the tech stuff, and they've done that. But then they forgot to put in the notification of how to unlock the door, or we see so often that people don't run through their own processes, maybe on a monthly or quarterly basis, just to make sure that all the pieces fit together. And if you are wondering around kind of best practices here, the last undercurrents that we did on e-commerce was actually sponsored by Office R&D, and we asked a whole bunch of operators on how to robustly test and implement on-demand bookings and e-commerce. So definitely go back and listen to that. It's on the newsletter under thisweekincoworking.com, under undercurrents or trends at the top menu. Click on the e-commerce one. It's freely available, video, audio, PDF, and on the web. So go into that and just use those best practices not to make these mistakes. Now, Ethan, as someone who is a product guy, this must have driven you mad. The tech could have worked.
Yes.
But Have you ever had this experience having to pop into a space and being frustrated, being stuck at the door, shaking to get in?
It's happened before. It's happened to me even more like when trying to get into Airbnbs. This made me think of Airbnb like a great experience versus a really bad experience. Airbnb owner, host wants to automate the check-in process. A great one is just seamless. You can get in with the right PIN code. It's texted or messaged to you in advance. And then when you get in, you have the Wi-Fi code ready to go, no problems. But then you have the ones where, they didn't send you the code on time, so you're locked out of the door, or you can't find the Wi-Fi password. Same thing here, right? They want operational efficiency, but they messed up with the hospitality, and then the whole thing is worthless. As a product guy, like the whole process started with just the website, and it was shocking to me how in the 21st century, you can't book a day pass. That shouldn't be happening. And so whether it's with our Growth Hub or with some other e-commerce engine, that should be a table stakes today. The check-in process is something that should be much, much smoother, much more automated, unlocking doors with codes or QR codes. It should be in this day and age, a very solvable challenge.
Yeah. And those are all kind of one-time implementations, right? You don't need to train a staff member. You could have a community manager who coordinates and make sure that everyone is getting what they need to get. But these pieces that you've said do not need human interaction at this point. Right?
Exactly.
Responding to inquiries, upselling, all of that. Yes, drop your great people into that. But you do not need to train them on how to process a Stripe transaction or send a Stripe link or make sure you're checking that inbox to know who's coming in. That stuff should and can be automated, especially if you're going for lean operations. Now, I know that we're running up on time, so I'm going to just drop two more stories that definitely caught my eye that if you are listening and you haven't read this newsletter, go and check these two pieces out. The one is data out of India, where the Cushman and Wakefield Maturity Index positioned India as the top most mature flax market in the world. This is something that a lot of people sleep on. A lot of publications sleep on this. Whenever we hear that Chicago or, Dallas is the hottest co-working market in the world, I'm like, let's compare that to India first, because they have tremendous numbers happening there. We're seeing huge M&A, seeing IPOs being stacked up in our industry, across our industry. So definitely look at that. There was a link shared by Frank Cottle over at Allwork that got into the newsletter this week. I'm just looking at the numbers, they are talking about 85 million square feet of flex by the end of 2025. Incredible. 85 million square feet. That is far and away the largest co-working and flex market in the world. So do not sleep on that. Go and read that news. Go dig into that report. Really, really good stuff, especially if you're operating anywhere in APAC. But also these companies are expanding out, right? These are your potential new competitors. Go and see what they're doing, how they're stacking up, because they are going to go public and they will expand internationally. On this topic of expanding internationally, WeWork just launched a extension to their network play. If you remember I think it was exactly a year ago, we announced that WeWork and the Vast Group put together a partnership where WeWork enterprise customers could use spaces in the Vast network in suburban and non-CBD regions so that they could extend the WeWork network for enterprise users without physically creating spaces. They've just added another 1,000 locations to that network, both in the US and abroad, really digging into partnerships with networks like Expansive and Pacific. So just a huge adaptation on that. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you weren't here a year ago in our feed or on our newsletter, hop over to the newsletter. I have dropped the link in where I actually interviewed the three main stakeholders of that initial deal. Anant Yardi, obviously CEO at the time of Yardi. He's stepping down and moving to chairman in a few months. I sat with John Santora, the CEO of WeWork, and also Jason Anderson, the CEO at Vast, really digging into how it works, the benefits, and what the plan was. And now a year later, we're seeing the next level of that plan. So go and have a look back at that, refresh, think about whether you want WeWork enterprise customers to sit in your spaces. If you do, maybe something you should consider as well. That is our entire recap for this week. Ethan, thank you for joining me, co-hosting and taking us through the week. What are you up to this weekend? Anything fun?
Well, one of our boys is having a birthday, so we're going to be heading out and celebrating together.
Amazing. Well, congratulations to that. My birthday is next week, so I will be celebrating that. Until then, we will be back in your feed on a Monday with a podcast drop. If you are listening from Canada, I will be in Canada for 4 hours on Monday, giving a talk at the Co-working Canada event. So if you're at that conference, definitely look out and say hi when you're there. If you are not going to be there, I will be in Chicago in October. So I will see you then for GWA. Have a fantastic weekend and we will see you next week. Thanks, Ethan.
Thanks.